Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to you talk about. Is there an interesting story about you on an animated thing called Olive the Other Reindeer with Drew Barrymore?
Oh yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. I wrote
About that.
song lyrics for that
Oh,
famous people have sung.
who wrote the music?
A guy named Christopher Ting. I think he came out of the Matt Groening empire. He must have done some work for The Simpsons or whatever, but I've never met him in person. But I wrote lyrics and he did the music. That was kind of my first foray into songwriting and lyric writing.
Okay, so we're now, so I'm going to erase all of this and we're now treat it as if we're starting. So
Very good.
Today I'm very happy to Zoom with a friend of mine who's had a big career with David Letterman and a lot of industrial shows. Good morning, Steve.
Hey, Bruce.
So now, growing up, was there any comedy in your youth?
Comedy, yes, but I mean, I watched sitcoms. I remember watching reruns of Gilligan's Island and the Beverly Hillbillies, and then later I was watching MASH and just stuff in the 70s and 80s, but really with very little notion that that could be a career. I was not a comedy nerd. I didn't collect Steve Martin's stand-up albums or anything like that. It wasn't until I was in college and I was at Harvard and I got on the Harvard Lampoon, and that was kind of my introduction to, oh, comedy could be not just a funny thing in some portion of your life. It could be a career, because people were going on to write for Saturday Night Live and David Letterman and so on. And the president of the magazine when I got there was Conan O'Brien, and he certainly made a big impression on me. I thought, wow, this guy is something special. I want to see more about this and see if I can get on the track where this train goes.
But what initially had you thought of going to Harvard for?
Well, I think 30 or 40 years ago, you could be a little vague about that. I know I was a suburban kid in Massachusetts who I did not have parents who were coming out of an Ivy League world. They had no particular expectations for me professionally. I think they just thought, well, as long as he grows up and stays out of trouble and we don't have to support him, that'll be fine. So I had no notion of what I wanted to do with my life at age 17 or 18, other than, oh, I think I'd like to be some sort of writer, but I didn't really know what that meant. And that was okay. I think that's age appropriate. I worry a little bit about kids in their teens who have their entire lives planned out professionally, because they don't know who they're going to turn out to be or what their passions are really going to be. I certainly have had many twists and turns along the way.
Whether they necessarily have the talent to do it. It's one thing to say, I want to sing on Broadway, but it's another thing whether they will let you do that.
Right. And well, I'll turn it back on you. At what point in your life did you have the light bulb go on over your head that made you say, oh, I need to be this maven of this kind of art form?
Well, by going to musicals at college, the professional touring companies in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Then after a year or two, I said, I want to go to New York because I can see every musical.
Right.
So that was my deal. But had you known the Lampoon? How early did you realize? So when you went to Harvard, you didn't think anything about the Lampoon?
No, it was such a different era. This was 1982 when I started applying to colleges. And even though I grew up in Massachusetts, there was a level of naivete that you just can't have anymore. I didn't know where Harvard was. I got the application and my eyes popped up. It's in Massachusetts? That's my own state. You can't be that stupid anymore. So that was the kind of level I was.
Did you apply to Princeton or NYU or?
Brown and Johns Hopkins, all out of sort of a very fuzzy notion of, oh, they have good creative writing programs. So I had the stirrings of some ill-formed thought about my creative future. But again, I really had no idea what the nuts and bolts of being a writer were professionally or any other way. So it was very lucky that I stumbled into Harvard, really kind of a miracle. And then that this magazine was there with all these funny people. And that really was a huge turning point in my life when I realized this magazine seems to suit me and I like being there with these people and I want to keep doing this.
Was there an actual office? You just went into the office and
Oh, the Harvard Lampoon is blessed with its own castle, just a block or two off Harvard Square. If anyone out there watching this is curious, you can certainly Google Harvard Lampoon Castle and see this wonderful, whimsical piece of architecture that was built around 1909. The first crop of Harvard Lampoon people from the 1870s were now successful professionals in this waspy world with money sloshing in every direction. And they said, we need our own clubhouse for this organization. And they bought this little triangular plot of land that no one else wanted. And one of the grads was by now an architect, and he designed this castle sort of in a 1600 style, Flemish style. A very quirky, whimsical building, which has now for like 100 and almost 125 years been not only where you maybe work on producing the magazine, but there are parties and just hanging out there constantly. It is an amazing thing for undergrads like myself. And by this point in history, most Harvard students were public high school kids, not from a rich background. And just to get to this campus and suddenly you're getting to play act at being a Gilded Age rich kid at this building with these parties in this great hall and dinners, and you'd buy a used tuxedo for $25 and dress up and pretend that you were some sort of Great Gatsby era swanky person. Really a weird and wonderful thing to do, but it really was also a magazine where people were trying their hardest to work out their comedy sensibilities.
So tell me how you walked into the building. And
Right.
was there
So
a receptionist or?
no, the ground floor rooms were kind of something the public could see. The upstairs was off limits and only members could go upstairs. But like when I was getting on the staff, everybody who wanted to be a writer had to turn in sample humor pieces that they'd written, throw them on the floor of this certain room downstairs, and then the staffers would read them and write comments on the back, sometimes encouraging, sometimes weirdly snarky. But I quickly came to realize, I think I got a hold of something here. They seemed to like my first couple pieces. This may be my thing.
Do you recall what you talked about? What you wrote about?
I had a couple of pieces that did get published in the magazine. One was an Old Testament book of the Bible parody, and another one was about the Beatles. Actually, this is interesting for my future. It was called Rock and Roll Rewriter. It was imagining if the Beatles wrote extremely cumbersome, wordy, dreadfully unpleasant versions of their songs, and the character who was the rewriter had to come in and take this terrible copy and slim it down to the versions that we all know. And I guess it did get to my not only love of playing with language, but also maybe a harbinger of my future interest in lyrics and songwriting. Now that I think about it, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
So were you paid much money for this?
Oh no, just a campus publication. You're just there for the love of it. And it was love. I worked there it was a college activity. It wasn't a job, but I was very happy to be there for, I guess, like 3 years. And we worked on summer projects. We did a very elaborate parody of USA Today with USA Today's blessing. So we got to use their layout equipment and printing presses and all that. Got some national exposure.
So tell me, who are the people that we would know who were also there?
Oh, many people who've gone on to great success. Conan O'Brien being probably the most well-known. He was the president, and made me think, wow, if I could be like that. A guy named Greg Daniels, who's gone on to great success creating many shows. He was integral to the American Office, and then oh, I can't remember them all. Did he do Parks and Recreation, Space Force? Guys I knew like Dan Graney, David Cohen, ended up at The Simpsons. David Cohen actually co-created Futurama with Matt Groening. And as we were talking about at one point, I did have some interaction with the Matt Groening empire eventually as well.
So you graduate, and then did you see a future?
It was not immediate. I got out of college really ill prepared for the real world. I guess again, it was the bookend to my ill preparedness to get into college. I was a bartender in Boston for a year. I was writing freelance humor pieces. The National Lampoon, which does have a connection to the Harvard Lampoon, was still in pretty good shape then. I sold them some humor pieces, but I was kind of kicking around at the edges of the business. I did land an agent, and that agent, God bless him, did help me get my first job, which was at not necessarily the news in Los Angeles. So for 6 weeks, I stayed on a friend's sofa in LA and worked on my first TV show.
And who was working on that?
Conan had been there, but was gone by the time I got there. Although I found his little cartoons in a desk drawer in my office. He loved to draw caricatures of himself. There were some other very good people. I know Merrill Marco, who had been one of the sort of founders of the Letterman show creatively, had contributed some pieces around that time, although I never met her. There's some excellent performers, but I rarely interacted with them at all. It was mostly just being in the office with the stable of writers, most of whom very solid LA professionals who've gone on to many other things, but I don't know if you'd know their names. I keep coming back to Conan O'Brien. He was always kind of the beacon. Wherever he was going, I was trailing after him in a sort of half-assed way. He ended up at Saturday Night Live, and I did not work there. I came close. I had an interview, and then there was a Writers Guild strike, and the show shut down for the rest of the season, and I was never able to re-engage with them in any meaningful way. But years later, I did work on Lorne Michaels' primetime variety show called Maya and Marty. That was like 6 years ago. So I kind of filled in that blank eventually.
So at this point, you are earning a living.
By 89, 90, I got my foot in the door. And that was when the grapevine of people I knew were saying, oh, the Letterman show just had a big turnover of writers. A bunch of people left. Now's the time to put in your writing sample at the Letterman show. And so I did that, and I had some good samples by then, things that had gotten on the air on not necessarily the news or wherever. And I was in the right place at the right time. I was in New York then. I was working on the Comedy Channel, which was the precursor to Comedy Central. And so I was able to be in the right place at the right time. And the head writer of the Letterman show, a wonderful guy named Steve O'Donnell, still a great friend, called me up one day out of the blue and said, well, we're interested in talking to you. We thought your samples were good. Would you like to come up to the Letterman offices and say hello? And I said, yes, I would. So it was mine to lose. Dave Letterman, I think, wanted to take a look at me, make sure I was not a psychopath. But I think
So how did that conversation go?
I remember he's a very genial, pleasant, well-spoken guy, great curiosity about everything in the world, which makes him a great interviewer. But he had heard that I worked at the Comedy Channel and did not know much about this. It had just come on the air a few months before. It was on cable. You couldn't even get it in Manhattan. But he was asked, what kind of shows are there? Who's behind this? What is it trying to do? And I told him as best I could. And I think I did not try to be Mr. Hilarious Jokester. I had the instinct that will go badly if I try to be the loud comedy guy in front of this man. So my natural personality was to just be myself and maybe made a couple of wry comments, but I did not try to bulldoze him by being funnier than he was. It would be a bad idea to try that. So I passed that test, spring 19.
How long a conversation would you say you had?
Oh, no more than 5 minutes, probably.
Oh.
But he could tell that, all right, my grooming was up to par. I could make eye contact, but not too much eye contact. I could answer questions in complete sentences, all the basics I checked off. And so if Steve O'Donnell, the legendary head writer, thought there was something that he could work with there and Dave didn't find himself viscerally disturbed by me, I could go ahead. So that was it. For 25 years, I was at the Letterman show.
So how many people typically were on the staff?
Oh, we had, it fluctuated, but there were usually 10 to 12 rank and file writers. In later years, there was some specialization, people who worked only on the monologue. In fact, a couple of guys in LA that you never saw. They just existed via email or fax machines earlier on. But a core group of 10 to 12 people just coming in every morning and pitching ideas and running at breakneck speed all day to produce fake commercials and fake news reports and funny props and strange interruptions from the cue card guy or the stage manager, or ideas of what to do out on the street if we sent the camera outside, and top 10 lists. Everyone knew about that. We all pitched in on that.
So how long was it before you were on the staff?
Really, I was hired as a full staff writer that critical time in the spring of 1990, and suddenly I had a good Writers Guild covered job. I still am in the Writers Guild, have my pension and health insurance through them. Terrific place to be, and it did suit me well. I certainly grew and progressed and matured as a writer through the years there. But Dave Letterman, very loyal and supportive of me, and a lot of the other long timers also felt like this was their home in a profound way. So it could be a difficult place to work. You never knew from day to day how things were going to go, and Dave's mood, and how your own creativity ebbed and flowed. But it was the right place for me for a long time.
You had a little office of your own, or you shared?
Oh, yes, I did. I had my little empire, and I think I may have told you, and this leads into how I eventually came to know you. My very first day, April 30th, 1990, Steve O'Donnell, the head writer, welcomed me to 30 Rock, brought me upstairs down the hall of the offices on the 14th floor, and said, "We got to get you an office." And since several writers had recently left the show, moved out to California for greener pastures, there were a number of empty writers' offices. So I kind of had my pick. Steve O'Donnell looked in the door of one office and said, "Oh, how about this office?" And I said, "Oh, sure, fine. What are these record albums?" There were boxes on the floor of record albums. And he said, "Oh, we do a bit on the show called Dave's Record Collection. It's a comedy bit with real weird, unintentionally funny record albums." And the writer who used to have this office was the guy who put together that bit. "Hey, maybe you could be the new Dave's Record Collection guy." And I said, "Sure, I don't know. Okay, sure, whatever." That set me on a course. That very first hour of my life at the Letterman show, a switch had already been thrown, which would lead to so much over the next.
Did you went through the majority of the albums?
Most of them, they'd gone through the waves of, the celebrities singing who shouldn't have been singing, like William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. All the instructional albums like Touch Typing and Learn to Take Dictation and Teach Your Parakeet to Talk. It was my job to go out and find new raw material, and that's where the next switch was flipped, when I would go to Footlight Records, for example, on 12th Street.
Sure.
And look for weird stuff that we could get a joke out of. And that's where I found My Insurance Man, Diesel Dazzle, American Motors 1966 announcement show, the first 4 or 5 industrials that I could not wrap my brain around. How can there be entire custom written musicals for an audience of dealers or salesmen at these companies? And that seems absurd on the face of it. So great, we can use this on the show. A song about being a diesel engine distributor, that's gold. But then why are they actually really pretty good? Why do I not get the songs out of my head if I'm walking around weeks after Dave's record collection has been done and I'm still singing the theme song from the Insurance musical or the song about Westinghouse Power Systems or something? I thought, what is going on here? So that was in the mid 90s. Another one I found very early was the General Electric show, Go Fly a Kite. And I grew up, as I think we've discussed, close to zero information or knowledge about Broadway or musicals or musical theater of any sort.
John Kander did not ring a big bell.
No. So I got this General Electric musical from 1966 about electric utilities and power systems. And the names on the back of the writers were John Kander, Fred Ebb, and Walter Marks. All names your eyes would light up over immediately, but zero recognition from me. People had to slowly, painfully explain to me, this is interesting. You know, these people are not amateurs. This is like a real name here. So that was part of the long, uncertain education. But I think
you recall the first industrial that was on the Letterman?
It was probably that General Electric show. I remember, GE Go Fly a Kite. We had some snarky remark about General Electric since they had owned NBC, and NBC had taken a nosedive. So we made some General Electric is an idiot sort of joke. But that was the first one I found. I thought, this is an amazingly elaborate, bizarre curiosity. That one was 2 records. Imagine that. There was so much material at this electric utility conference that they needed 2 discs to fit all the Kander and Ebb and Walter Marks songs on it.
And in many cases, these things were done once.
Yeah. So many of them were a one-shot deal, and it was very unusual that a record album would be pressed. It was so expensive to do this extra step of getting a recording studio and paying all the performers and an orchestra and recording engineers and getting this pressed and sent out to hundreds of people within the company. It's not surprising that they're the exception to the rule. Most of these industrial shows were so ephemeral. They just existed once, or maybe if it was a car show that went to 5 cities, so the dealers in the Southwest and the Northeast and everybody could come and see the new models they were about to sell. But I think it was 1996 when I really kicked into overdrive and thought, I can be more assertive, proactive about this. I don't have to wait to see what shows up in the record stores. There must be people out there I can talk to. And that's when I started contacting composers like Hank Beebe, wrote the music for Diesel Dazzle and got to investigate Silicones and so many others. I found him. I found other collectors, and that's when I found you. Was 1996. I don't remember who told me about you, but somebody said, you know who you ought to talk to. There's this guy, Bruce Yecko, who knows all about original cast recordings. He's got every crazy thing in the world. He knows everything about it. That's a guy who I bet would help you out. And boy, was I excited to talk to you. And you started rattling off all these industrials that you knew about or had. I don't know if you have any recollection of that, but it was one of those great moments of somebody else knows what I'm talking about. That was not always the case. You'd say, I'm looking for corporate musicals or industrial shows, and record dealers at flea markets or a record show, they just have this blank look on their face. They had no idea what you're talking about, but you knew what I was talking about.
it's amazing that they had a separate bin labeled industrial musicals, because nowhere else in the world would that have happened. You didn't.
Right. That is the only store I've ever seen. I've seen a couple of record dealers at record shows that had a little section like that, but for a store to have a little bin with a tab that said industrials, I think only in New York City could that have existed, because things were coming out of performers' closets and people are giving things away or selling them. And there must have been the core of the performance world that had these albums, because people had been in the cast and were getting rid of them.
The cast is Broadway people, right? They did not. I think there might have been some people that weren't Broadway, but the majority, and some big names. You know.
Yeah, that was the other thing. Like we're talking about the show Diesel Dazzle. I recognized Hal Linden was in the cast.
Right.
And I thought, well, I know him. He's Barney Miller, for God's sake. David Hartman, the future ABC newsman, was a song and dance Broadway guy before he got into the journalism. He was on Diesel Dazzle. And once you see that, and then you start getting the intel from your friends that, you know, this Ford tractor show written by these guys, Harnick and Bach, that's interesting because they're the Fiddler on the Roof team. And the puzzle pieces slowly start to click into place. That this is an enormously talented pool of people doing this entire alternate universe version of show business that the public is unaware of. And only these tiny clues are trickling out through these souvenir albums that were private pressings, never available to the public, only given out to people at General Electric or Plymouth or fluorescent light tubes by Westinghouse or whatever.
We're saying there are a couple hundred maybe LPs.
There's got to be that small a pressing on some of them, and you and I have had some dealings with records that you'd think a General Electric record, well, that's a huge corporation. How many central air conditioner dealers did General Electric really have? A few dozen, 100? Yeah, the pressings on some of these were minuscule. There are many records in my collection, and the few other peers I have as friends who collect, so many that are the one known copy of something, or maybe one of two or three in the world. Some of them are more famous, like Diesel Dazzle. I don't know why, but they pressed a lot of that. The Bathrooms are coming, the American Standard musical. I once talked to somebody involved with that who thought they had pressed 5,000 copies, which is a lot by this standard. So that one you can find. It's expensive now, but you can find it. I think you were my source for the very first copy of that show that I ever got. That was a holy grail for a while.
So what were some of the other places you went to find these?
WFMU, the radio station, always had a record fair a couple times a year and somewhere in New York City. So I started going to that, and I got organized enough to print out a copy of a want list. And I would dig through dealers who had weird, miscellaneous, oddball stuff. Once in a while I'd find something, but more often it was, hey, can I give you my want list? Maybe it pays off in a few years, or maybe never. But there were record dealers, eBay. eBay was the big thing. Around 97, I joined eBay fairly early on. But that was the perfect storm. That was the right place at the right time, because America was collectively cleaning out its closets and attics and garages and selling the debris of the previous century. And so many people were saying, what is this record album from this Coca-Cola salesman convention that Uncle Bob went to? See if we can get $5 for it. There was no market value established for any of this, and only a handful of people, myself and a couple others, who were even aware of it to look for it. So for the first 7 years of eBay, I was just running through the candy store. I was picking up stuff every other week for $4, $6.
Would you type in titles you knew existed?
Yes, but also keywords like sales meeting, uh, management conference, things like that. And you'd see a lot of stuff that wasn't record albums, but once in a while, or announcement show. I'll give you another one. That's how I would probably find some of the car company shows, introduction show also. But so many companies were doing these for so long. It was appliances, it was department stores, it was food, it was electrical equipment, tractors. I'm still finding new ones. Yesterday, I got an email. Somebody who I guess saw the documentary Bathtubs Over Broadway, which has been a great thrill in my life. Somebody at a record store in upstate New York said, "Hey, I got something you might be interested in." Usually when you hear that, it's not something of interest, but one time out of 50, oh my God, how did I not know about this record when I've been looking for 25 years? It was a General Electric Silicone Products Department sales meeting record that was not Got to Investigate Silicones. That's the one that is the more famous one. But this was, here we go, another never before seen record.
Who was involved in the show?
I Googled the names of the composer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not big names that you knew.
No, nothing came up that would shock us. I know one of the songs on the record is a parody of a Barry Manilow song, and that, we should mention, is a very big part of the genre. It was much easier to take a pre-existing Broadway tune or pop tune and just write new lyrics to it. And the audience would go, "Hey, I know that song. Oh, now it's about light bulbs, but okay, sure." But the best stuff, and I think for me and for other collectors and hopefully you, the most interesting stuff is the original music and lyrics created for just this show of floor tile salesman or whatever. And you think, that is amazing, that the trouble and expense and care that talented people went to start from a blank slate and created a whole musical about this wildly improbable topic. And what I loved, and what the documentary shows also, is when you find these people, Hank Beebe, Michael Brown, Sid Siegel, they could not bear to do mediocre work. This is what elevates this whole topic for me, is people who work on something you've never heard of and don't understand, and yet they insist that whatever talent they have must be brought to the fullest realization, whether it's a show everyone in the world is going to know forever, or a show that's going to play once at 8 a.m. in a hotel ballroom for Lipton tea distributors or whatever. They just thought, if you're going to do it, just do it right. Just do it the best you can. And I loved that. And I try to hold on to that feeling. And it's hard. At the Letterman show, every day you'd write stuff, most of which wasn't used, most of which would be thrown away. Even the stuff that got on would be forgotten in a week. How do you keep your morale and your inspiration up to the level you need? And it was a real lesson from these creators about, you do it because your inner compass says you have to do your best. So suddenly the biggest lessons of life and art are coming to the fore through my weird collection of industrial show albums.
So nobody said, "I just did it because of a lot of money and I did it in 2 weeks."
Yeah, once in a while you'd get somebody who said, "Yeah, I did the Bic pen show. It was fine. I mean, I don't really remember much about it. I know the money was good, but I didn't really care about it." You would get that side of the spectrum. And those people probably were not going to become your new friends and mentors as much as the Hank Beebes, the Michael Brown, the Sid Siegels. They had this fire in their eye. This, I don't care if it is a show about being a Lay's potato chip distributor. I'm going to make it the best show about being a potato chip distributor that humankind could ever imagine. I'm going to make the people walk out of that auditorium with their hair blown back by, what did we just see? Why is my heart pounding? I thought, I love that. People who take the material that shouldn't be a musical and say, we are going to make it into a musical. And not only that, it's going to be something that is going to get people ready to jump out of their seats with excitement about their career and their next move. That probably not all the time do you get that fired up, but I know the audiences at these shows could be very moved and very touched and excited. A version of their world on stage in which it's important and they're heroes and they're, yes, making money, but they're also pushing mankind ahead through better tractors that are going to help world food production. There are ways to make it seem like it is important. It does matter.
You have any idea how long they took to put a show? Let's say they had a GE show. Hank Beebe, would he tell you how long the process was?
Yeah. By most standards, I think they were done pretty quickly, but big, elaborate book shows with big budgets, I think they would take a couple months to write them, and you'd have to run the material by various levels of vice presidents and so on. And that could be scary. You'd go to Detroit or whatever, be in a conference room with all these vice presidents, and you have an upright piano, and you and your writing partner, or you by yourself, would demo a bunch of the songs and try to sell the show in its skeletal form to this room full of executives. And if they knew you and trusted you from a previous year, many of these companies brought the same people in all the time, then it was sort of a good, comforting place. And they might say, oh, let's try to make it more about the new pickup truck is going to have this feature, or make sure you mention that, or whatever. Sometimes it was really difficult, and every executive thought, I have to have a very important suggestion to prove my worth. And you get people who have no idea about show business or music or anything creative weighing in on what the show should be like. Oh, and you had to be so diplomatic to handle that. But yeah, there were weeks of rehearsals, big orchestras. Las Vegas, they did a lot of shows in Vegas, and it was great for the musicians who worked at night in these big casino showrooms. But the next morning they could come in and do these industrials, which often happened earlier in the day, and they were the cream of the crop of big Vegas orchestra professionals. I'm sure there are so many wonderful shows that were never recorded that we would just be amazed at the level of sharp musicality that was the norm for these circles of people they worked on. But yeah, it was done fast, but it was not done cheap or shoddily.
2 weeks, if they were to do a show, maybe everyone would gather for 2 weeks.
I have notes somewhere. I think it varied, like how elaborate the show was. Performers would definitely have like a couple of weeks of rehearsals in New York, and then say you were doing the RCA show in Las Vegas, you'd get there and do a couple more days of rehearsals in the space, dress rehearsals, shaking down with the real orchestra. But you came to the venue pretty well prepared, and then you'd have a couple more days, and then boom, showtime. And then suddenly one big show, and it was all over, and you moved on to the next one. Okay, what are we doing next? Oh, kids sneakers. Okay, so forget all about the RCA new line of stereo equipment. Now my head must be filled with RCA, with kids sneakers specifications and lyrics and all that. And then you do that, and then performers have found lists or made lists for me over decades of 80 or 100 shows they did, and people would tell me, I don't remember half of these at all. You just cranked them out. You didn't do them poorly. You were in demand if you were able to learn fast and execute beautifully, but your brain could not retain all this. And so many of these shows just have disappeared from the earth in all tangible forms but the clues we have from the records, and then I've found some films. I have a lot of programs and photos. We've reconstructed enough to be pretty sure that we understand this world now.
So would you hazard any kind of number as to how many industrial musicals there were during the Golden Age?
So I say the Golden Age is roughly the mid 50s to the late 80s, and it did continue past that. But like I don't know, I have like 200 something records in my collection. And people say, oh, well, you must have the whole field pretty well nailed down. This must be all of it. And I say, based on how rare it was for a record to be made, I must have 1 to 2% at most of what was ever done in this field. All the car companies did them every year. Other big companies did them on a regular basis. Appliance companies, J.C. Penney, Woolworth, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, every big company you can think of in every industry was probably doing this on a regular basis for a long time. And we have only the merest scraps that have survived. So it must have been many thousands of shows.
Okay.
I want to ask you, when you started finding these, did you suspect that it was as large a subculture as it turned out to be?
No, no. Does Hank Beebe, he's still with us, right? He's still
Hank Beebe will be
Vermont?
96 next month, God willing. Great friend and mentor, still writing. He was, like so many of these creators, certain that no one beyond their immediate family would ever have the faintest idea of what all this was. Even within your family, it was hard to explain. I write musicals, but they're not for the public. They're for various companies and their dealers or distributors or whatever. Very hard for most people to wrap their mind around this. So he had sort of made his peace with the notion that I made good money doing this, and it was often creatively satisfying, but I have no legacy that the world can ever understand. And then I showed up. I tracked him down and said, you don't know me, but I am a fan of Diesel Dazzle and the American Motors Show and the GE Silicones. And again and again, all these writers and performers would be stupefied. How can you possibly know about that? There's no way you could have known about those shows. And I would say, well, I collect the records and I found several of them. And that was beyond their imagination. But they began to realize, maybe I can feel good about this. They would listen to stuff they had written decades before and say, wow, that was good, wasn't it? Yeah, I had to do it at a white hot pace under pressure, but it was good. And I said, yes, it was. And then I would say, Hank, I'm working on a book now. A friend of mine, Sport Murphy, another record collector, and I did this book. And I told Hank that we're doing this book about industrial shows. He said, I don't see how that can possibly be a good thing to do. He was still skeptical that the world could pay enough attention to care and hear what I heard. But when the book came out, 2013, he was amazed at how many other people there were like him. None of these people knew what else was happening in Detroit or Chicago or Dallas. You only knew what you did and maybe one or two other colleagues. He was amazed at how big this world was, this hidden world. There was no fraternal organization for people who worked on industrials. There was no meeting where you'd meet the person like you in St. Louis or California. So he was surprised at how big this world was, and he was starting to feel like, I can hold my head a little higher. There was a cloud over you in the New York theater world if you were known to do industrials. Hank Beebe told me a few years ago that he felt very vindicated now. The book, then the movie, the soundtrack album. He said, I am amazed and delighted that I've lived long enough to see this, because in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s in New York City, I was called the king of the industrial shows by people in the theater world, and they meant it as an insult. It was not artistically cool to do this stuff. It was a little bit shameful to take your talents and apply it to this. You'd make good money, but you had to feel like this cloud was over you. And then he said, all those people who said that to me, they're dead now. And I am still alive. And I am here to see people who were not even born when this music was created. And they're listening to it and enjoying it and curious about the world that it existed in and listening to it with open ears and open minds. He was very grateful. And I know other people like this, older people, some no longer with us, and their families have felt this great sense of, it's a miracle, but it happened. The world can now understand what my dad did or what my husband did in a way that we can feel like we are part of musical theater history. We're part of American history. I feel very proud that my curiosity led me to this point where I can make a lot of people feel good.
Did he have a shelf, or does he have a shelf of all these alphabetically?
It was not that well organized. You see in the movie, I should mention Bathtubs Over Broadway, the documentary made by Dava Whisenant about my explorations of this world and my deep dives, literally in some cases, at Hank Beebe's house in Portland, Maine. You see me go into the basement. The basement of this ancient 1855 mansion is so big it has a loft in it. And I go up into this loft where these collapsing cardboard boxes are spilling out scores and manuscripts of shows I've never even heard of because most of them weren't recorded. And it was like as I called it in the movie, the Lost Library of Alexandria. Just, you know that there must be places on Earth that contain this material, but how will you ever find them? And I found one of the big ones there. He does, I think, have the vinyl of most of them, but he never assumed or imagined that this would be of interest to anyone. He had not curated it with any particular care. Now he and his family have gone back and I think upgraded their storage system for the vast treasure trove of scripts and scores and all that, and at least put them in plastic bins so the mice won't eat them. But it was a big surprise to all these people that late in the game, it turned out, no, there was going to be interest and recognition of something that they had assumed could not be explained or understood or cared about by the wider world.
Did he say which of his he today thought were the best of?
Well, he recalls some shows that were terrific that were not recorded, and that's painful to hear about. Like he said, he and his late writing partner, Bill Heyer, were at the top of their form in the 70s when they were doing some McDonald's shows that were big budget extravaganzas with top creative people up and down the line. No recordings, so at least not so far. Diesel Dazzle, I think he recalls as one where everything went right. They had a terrific cast, Hal Linden and David Hartman, Bill Shirley, a name you might know. He apparently did the vocal overdub of On the Street Where You Live for the My Fair Lady movie. So these people were back and forth between industrials and high-level show business all the time. For some reason, there was a terrific executive at the Detroit Diesel Company, and this could make or break a show, whether somebody who hired you for a gig like this got out of the way and let you do your best work without meddling or second guessing. And there was this executive, Lauren Wells at Detroit Diesel, who believed in Hank and Bill and trusted them and let them do their best work that was funny and also painful in some ways. These companies could use these shows as therapy, as Hank points out in the movie. There were problems at Detroit Diesel or McDonald's or whatever company where a dysfunctional organization was making life miserable for its managers or dealers or whatever. Hank and Bill would go on the road and talk to Detroit Diesel distributors or McDonald's managers and ask what's really going on that headquarters doesn't understand. What would you love to see addressed to make your work and your life better? And they would get an earful and very frank descriptions of what was wrong with the company bureaucracy or whatever. And Hank and Bill would make songs humorously pointing out and acknowledging these problems. And the best companies like Detroit Diesel would say, ooh, that's painful to hear about, but let's put it in the show because we need that credibility with the audience. They need to hear that we understand there's a problem and that we're facing it. And when a company could do that, you got so much goodwill from the people in the audience. It wasn't just cheerleading. It was, we know we screwed up last year with this program or this product and you've suffered, and it's so much more effective to do it through a funny song than through a speech by a guy at a podium. I think this was one of the secret weapons of these shows. Psychologically, you could reach people and get them feeling like they were on the same team as the whole company if you did it with a show that brought them along through music and humor. And it's a tremendous lens on organizational psychology and 20th century American business, all these areas that I, as a comedy writer, could not have imagined being interested in, but it just kept unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. But anyway, to your question, Diesel Dazzle was one of those perfect storms where everything went great, and the audience was just, they felt like somebody finally gets it. They understand our problems and they understand the pride that we have trouble expressing about the company we work for and the products we sell. So it is kind of a landmark in that sense.
Did Ford ever like make fun of the Etzel and
You would hear things in these shows that the companies would not say in public. Speaking of Ford, there's a Ford, a 1957 Ford introduction show. Let's say, here's the greatest new car today. Here's the car that will lead the way and beat the hell out of Chevrolet. We all know that was the rivalry. They weren't going to say something like that in a commercial. They weren't going to name names and get a little salty. But in private, behind closed doors at these shows, yes, they could get like that. And Coca-Cola would have some song about how difficult it is to be a bottler, and we want to send all the guys from OSHA straight to hell. They're not going to say that in public, but they know that would get a huge roar from the audience in private. Edsel, what you mentioned, there is an Edsel musical from 1957. They were kicking off this new line of the 58 Edsel, and all was sunshine and optimism. Everything is going our way. It's the once in a lifetime opportunity. That, of course, did not pan out. I've never heard of a show subsequent by Ford that acknowledged that, although I wouldn't be surprised, although it might have been too painful for a while. I know there was another Edsel show the next year that Michael Brown worked on.
Oh.
I've seen the script in his home. Joy Brown, his widow, maintains the archive there, and I've been allowed to look through a lot of stuff. As far as I know, no recording of the next Edsel show happened. I think they just had to plow ahead with optimism. It wouldn't do probably any good for a mortally wounded company to admit that it was bleeding. But yeah, the Edsel is a fascinating.
You know who wrote the first Edsel one?
I have some scan somewhere of a program, and I don't recall the names off the top of my head. It was nobody I'd ever heard of. Regan Film Productions out of Detroit did the show. I don't know if it was Broadway people in that one or whether they had there was a very good talent pool in Chicago also that a lot of Midwest shows drew upon. And that, speaking of Chicago, The Bathrooms Are Coming, the beautiful, beloved, weird American Standard plumbing fixture musical. That was an entirely Chicago crew, except the director wanted to have a New York actress. So they brought in one New York person to sort of be the glamour girl, but mostly Chicago people. And I suspect a lot of Detroit-based productions probably could have drawn on Chicago people also. So again, I could look up those names maybe somewhere. I'm not even sure where I have that information, but again, I may be an idiot and not recognize the brilliant Broadway name that you would, but whoever it was didn't ring a bell.
You weren't impressed. I found one recently, and it had Robert Fosse.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that didn't ring a big bell. I said it's Bob Fosse because it says courtesy of FGM.
Yeah, he was quite young then.
But I'm thinking, listening to it, I do not hear his voice. So I'm thinking perhaps he only danced, which of course on the record.
Right. That was my theory also, and I'm glad that you agree about that. That was the 1954 Oldsmobile show, which I think was kind of a watershed moment. I think that was the first real book musical industrial. Prior to that, there had been convention songs and light reviews with unconnected numbers, but this was the first one that I know of that was like a book musical with characters and a plot and this extremely high level of polish and ambition, with the souvenir record pressed on translucent red vinyl. Yeah, and Bob Fosse in it. So that I think upped the ante considerably. And I think after that, all the car companies said, we have to do this. And suddenly General Electric appliances had to have a musical, and J.C. Penney had to have a musical. I think that really changed the game, that particular show.
So I'm amazed that all the orchestrations and things exist. So again, cast albums could be made with new people. Like Hank Beebe would probably be happy if we got Broadway current people and recorded. I mean, the expense, again, how would this money be returned? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, he has, and Michael Brown, Sid Siegel, a lot of these people saved a lot of their material, and you have lead sheets at least, and in some cases you have fully orchestrated scores for all the different instruments. There was so much work that went into this, and so many
they would have as many people as in a Broadway orchestra sometimes, right?
Yeah, the big car companies. Hank told me the first show he didn't know what an industrial was until his agent said, you want to try out for the Chevrolet show. He didn't know what that was. 1956. And he went to the auditions, and he had a bunch of pretty snappy, fun nightclub material, and won over the Chevrolet executives and got to write the music for this show. But he said the budget for that Chevrolet show he did in 1956 was $3 million. And he said that was like 6 times as much as it cost to put My Fair Lady on Broadway the same year. And yes, I think you had to move the Chevrolet show to 5 different cities and put up people in hotels and fly them and drive the 18-wheelers full of props and costumes around. It was a huge undertaking, but that does illustrate the amount of money for a huge Fortune 100 company to put on these shows. It was not going to break the bank. It was just yet another business expense, tax deductible probably. But yeah, the professionals all up and down the line, not cheap. So many people made their living from these shows for decades.
You recall Did you have a nice conversation with John Kander? Did you recall what he thought?
We corresponded a number of years ago, and I sent him a letter saying I was interested in this line of work, and I know he had done at least one industrial, the General Electric show with Fred Ebb, and he did write back, and he said, I don't really remember very much about that project. Maybe Fred Ebb would remember more. And I think shortly thereafter, Fred Ebb passed away. So that has not been a tremendous treasure trove of information. But I did find out that the New York Public Library, the branch at Lincoln Center, has all of Fred Ebb's papers. And I went up there, and there was a lot of raw materials, scripts, drafts, notes, manuscripts from the General Electric show from 1966, but another industrial they did after Cabaret. They had already made it by the end of 1966. They had this big show.
Yeah.
They must have already agreed to do a Ford show. And then I guess they said, well, we can't back out of it. Plus, it's good money. The summer of 1967, the 1968 Ford introduction show was theirs, and there's music manuscripts and lyric pages and all that from that I took pictures of. So that one, no recording, but there is a lost Kander and Ebb industrial show that exists only in the form of these papers in the library.
Are you aware of any performers that were in them?
I would have to check and see if I have any information on that. I don't recall any. There's another one that I know you know of also. Cy Coleman did at least a couple of industrials. There's a Ford show he did. One copy in the world known, and it's not in my possession or yours.
Right.
So that's another holy grail we're looking for. But yeah, these sometimes they were people on the way up who weren't famous yet, but sometimes they were well-established people who said, sure, for that amount of money, yes, I'll write your show for the new Ford line or whatever. And Cy Coleman did at least two of them.
I think Walter Marks had not done Broadway in 1966.
Yeah, it was right around then that
Again, I'm hoping to Zoom with him. He's had slight health problems, but he said, I think in a few weeks.
oh, good. Well, he's a
The thing that
terrific guy.
fascinated me is that I recorded a flop musical on TLC August Moon called Lovely Ladies, Kind Gentlemen. And I spent a lot of time and money, and it's never going to come out for various reasons. But I was amazed that before this one, he had written his own version of it. And he didn't think that was interesting at all. You know, maybe because, I said, I would love to hear. He said, well, it wasn't done. I said, but I still, this I think was done after he had the Golden Rainbow was his big show.
Right.
And then
that was the one that had I Gotta Be Me in it.
Right. He lives off I Gotta Be Me. That's all you need.
He did very well. He told me a story about how that song came about. I don't know if he's told you. Oh. I have gotten to know Walter a little bit, visited with him and hung out with him. We've had some lovely times, but he told me Steve Lawrence, Edie Gourmet said, we want to do this musical and we want to have this big signature song that's going to be our version of Impossible Dream. You got to write us an Impossible Dream. And he said, okay. So they pretty much locked him in a hotel room and said, don't come out till you got the perfect song. And he sat there and he wrote stuff. And the next day he kept trying stuff. And on the third day, he came up with I Gotta Be Me. And suddenly, well, there it is. He actually did it.
Right.
A standard right there. Yeah, but Walter did industrials in the early to mid 60s intermittently. I don't know the entire timeline, but I know he did some he did at least one in the late 70s. So he was
Is
in
there
and out.
something that is a record besides?
There's Well, he's on Go Fly a Kite, the GE show with Kander and Ebb. Although he didn't meet them, he didn't directly collaborate with them, apparently. He just contributed some songs and they did some songs. I know he did a couple of Chrysler Plymouth shows in the 60s. And then there's a gap. And then he did Porsche Audi in 1979. That I have on vinyl with his name on it.
Is that particularly good?
It's pretty good. The later era shows were moving away from Broadway. They're trying to be more slick and modern pop, maybe to your taste, maybe not. It's a good one, but by the late 70s, the writing was kind of on the wall for this stuff. It was no longer new. It was not a novelty. If you were a Ford dealer, you went to the annual unveiling of the new models, you thought, oh yeah, the musical, sure, we've always seen those. So it was kind of old hat, and they were so expensive to do with the big casts and orchestras. More and more you started to have video on big screens that looked big and flashy, but was not the commitment of writing a new musical every year. And even in the 60s, it was starting to integrate film with live stuff on stage. But more and more companies said, we don't need to do these big musicals. And there were smaller casts and smaller orchestras and more lip syncing. And it was just slowly eroding. Economic forces were pinching, and accountants and consultants said, you don't need to do all this. You don't need to spend all this money. Not even sure it's helping really, but it is so expensive. The tax code may have changed and made it less of a viable option, but you see them dying out by the late 70s into the 80s. They never went away entirely, but yeah, it was the glory days, I would say, were like mid 50s to about 1970.
They always generally had the album at the convention, so they must have done this before they ever went through the rehearsal period. I mean, they had to rehearse those songs, but I guess the first thing they did was to go into a studio. So it takes, a while. You can't the next day come out with a printed LP.
Yeah, it varied. You're right that there were some conventions where they would give you the record as you're finishing up, and oh, here's a souvenir to take home. So that had been in the works for a long time and recorded and pressed ahead of time. But sometimes you see ones that there's a message from the company president on the back, or in a letter that's tucked inside. Several months ago, we all gathered together in Bermuda for the big convention, and we had a lot of fun. And now we've gotten the souvenir record done. So sometimes there was a several months lag time before the record showed up as a little bonus in the mail later.
Tell us how the movie got. How did it turn into a movie?
So Sport Murphy and I did this book, Everything's Coming Up Profits, which beautifully done by Blast Books, a small imprint here in New York City, chock full of album covers and program photos and anecdotes. I had tracked down many of the major players by this point and interviewed them. So a very comprehensive look at what was known at the time, but that was almost 10 years ago now. And I had worked at the Letterman show with an editor named Dave Whisenant, a wonderfully talented editor who was now working out in California on films and starting to get more into the documentary world. And when the book came out, she said, I think there's so much more here to tell. You're still finding not only records, but you're finding people. I think there's so much to tell here. I want to do a documentary about this. And I said, absolutely, let's do it, because I trusted her. I knew her sensibility was going to be right for this topic, which is strange because it's hilarious and weird, but there are these profound streams of inquiry that come out of it about how do you decide whether what you've done with your life is valuable or meaningful, and how do you reconcile your artistic impulses with the need to make money, all these big questions. And I knew she was going to do a great job with it. She just got on a plane and came to New York with her camera and started shooting, just jumped right in. And that was early 2014.
Did you realize right away that you were going to be the star of this?
That was kind of the belief from the beginning. I think she had to convince some investors at various points that this guy,
David Letterman or a well-known person, that would have been preferable in terms of audience.
Yeah. Well, we were very lucky. Dave Letterman gave us some money early on to keep our shooting going. And he came on as an executive producer, which gave us a lot of credibility. And he's in the movie. I interview him. So his involvement helped give us some traction. And Dava shot some early material that proved that I was somebody who could carry the movie. My stories, my interactions with people, my explanations of what I was doing and why. She felt like it was going to work, and she was proven right. The movie took 4 years to make, but it premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2018, and Dava won Best New Documentary Director with a substantial prize, and she has won so many other awards for this movie. Her screenplay, and yes, documentaries have a screenplay. They are made of real life material, but they still have to be worked together as a story that works. She got the Writers Guild of America award for that. So many best of the festival at many film festivals. And the movie's on Netflix, Amazon, and iTunes, and it is full of not only songs that you hear from my record collection, but so much archival footage that you're not going to find anywhere else, either from my collection or that of other people. And it is weird and hilarious, but as I say, it does get into these profound questions of life and art and business and how they all mix together, but also human connections. And you're one of them. You're one of my people, Bruce. This crazy adventure has brought me down a winding path where I'm now honorary member of so many families of people that I could not have imagined knowing or meeting. But you and I have known each other 25 years, and here and there I would check in on you just to see how you're doing, and hear your latest and how you got through the pandemic and all that. And so I love this feeling that I have become part of a secret tribe. Not so secret maybe, but that's another big part of the movie, is how we find our people.
Did you say millions of people have watched it on Netflix and Amazon?
Maybe. It's the sort of movie that gets such great word of mouth. People watch it on Netflix and then tell 10 people about it, go on Facebook or Twitter and tell everybody they know, oh my God, I just saw this movie. I could not have imagined that this was a kind of music and a secret world, but it is so amazing and weird and funny and then ultimately touching. I don't know that there's ever been a better movie for word of mouth. And then Netflix, however their algorithms work, they pick up on something about this and they start recommending it when you turn on Netflix. And they'll say, oh, if you liked this, maybe you'll like that. And then the wave keeps rolling and rolling. And it's great. I hear from people still almost every day, just out of the blue. They send me an email or a message on Instagram or whatever. I just watched this movie and I'm so touched and fascinated, and I wanted to say hello. Sometimes it's my dad worked for Westinghouse, and we might have some stuff in the closet you'd like to see. Sometimes that's something. Sometimes it's the record store guy who says, hey, just saw the movie, unbelievable. I think we have a couple of these in the back room. And then suddenly you might have another copy of Penny Proud or The Rambler Show, which you know, and which you're always happy to get a good spare of. But sometimes it's the Hot Point Appliance Show. I've never heard of that. So it's just fun.
I'm not really aware of the Rambler. What's the Rambler? Who's involved in
Rambler.
that?
Yeah, Rambler was turned into American Motors, but before they were American Motors, around 65, it
Yeah,
was Rambler.
we owned a Rambler in 1954, I believe.
Oh, well, you were an early adopter. Yes, they were kind of an interesting part of American automotive history, because between Rambler and Volkswagen, the ethos of American cars must be enormous was shifted, and then big three, GM, Ford, Chrysler, had to start making compact cars also, because the Rambler had taken such a big piece of the pie. But
Big deal
Hank,
was that you could fold the seat down and sleep in it.
oh yes, the sort of Murphy bed version.
Right.
But yeah, Hank Beebe and Bill Heyer did a few Rambler and American Motors shows. The one that I'm thinking of was for the 64 line. It was called Going Great. That had a young Hal Linden in it as well.
I zoomed with Hal Linden, and he told me that I think the first success he had was an off-Broadway production of Anything Goes. But he said it was recorded by a division of Columbia Records, and but he said during the summer, I can do summer stock and industrial shows, so I can't afford to stay. I'd like to sing Cole Porter, but I need so if you'll sort of let me come back, I will come back. But during the summer, it's summer stock and industrial shows. And in the fall, he said, "You want me back?" They said, "Yeah, yeah."
Yeah, he was a stalwart on the industrial scene for a number of years, and he played clarinet.
Yes.
And Hank Beebe has told me when they would go somewhere and do a show like in Las Vegas or whatever, Hal would sing and dance and act in the show, but then in the evening there'd be some reception with an orchestra and a dinner, and just everyone would mingle. But Hal would take his clarinet and get up with the band and sit in with the band and do a wonderful performance.
Yeah, he got parts in Bells Are Ringing. He replaced Sidney Chaplin, Bells Are Ringing. But then he would sometimes take a smaller part in another musical and say, "Well, I was a star of Bells Are Ringing." He was willing to take a lesser role because he wanted to be on Broadway. But the pay off Broadway was, again, talk to other people, and they said, "Well, I had to live with my mother. I couldn't afford to have an apartment." It was like $100 a week or something like that in New York City then.
You could make more money as a industrial show player than you could as a sort of non-star on Broadway. So a lot of people found this world to be very seductive,
Right.
and you could do better financially for a long time, with the trade-off that your career was not really going to be advanced by this, because you weren't going to be a new household name doing industrials.
Yes,
But Hal, very
you
lucky, talented guy, but he did industrials during the 60s for a long time. And then what was it? The Rothschilds was his breakout Broadway role, and he got a Tony Award. And then he's Hal Linden's, then he's Barney Miller. But I found at one point, because I get a lot of stuff that's not vinyl records now, and at some point I got a program for the 1983 Ford introduction show, big musical extravaganza, 1983. And the big headliner MC celebrity was Hal Linden. So he was now being brought back into this world, not as an anonymous player in the cast, but as the big name everyone's excited to see. So that was very interesting, that you could graduate out of that and yet come back as the star.
A couple other lesser known things. You did a TV show with Drew Barrymore called Olive and the Other Reindeer.
Olive the Other Reindeer. That's right. I had worked on. I did a Simpsons episode back in the 90s, and that was tremendous fun. I loved the working with the Simpsons staff on that episode. And then not too long afterwards, Matt Groening, creator of The Simpsons, had optioned a children's book and wanted to do an animated Christmas special. And they brought me in for that. And that was a lot of fun. It was an animated show about this little dog who thinks she's a reindeer because she hears on the radio all of the other reindeer instead of all of the other reindeer. So I wrote this script, and it's for kids, but it also has Simpsons-esque smart jokes in it. And they got Drew Barrymore to play the voice of the little dog. They got Ed Asner as Santa. Michael Stipe from REM was a reindeer, and turned out wonderfully well. I'm very proud of it, and it really was my first foray into lyric writing. I think I wrote several songs, the lyrics for a guy named Chris Ting wrote the music. That was an early taste of songs, and now that's a bigger part of my life. Bathtubs Over Broadway has 3 original songs that I either wrote or co-wrote, and I've since pursued songwriting and have a batch of originals I'm hoping to put out this year. But yeah, All of the Other Reindeer is kind of a somewhat under the radar but perennial Christmas classic.
Well, when you write with other people, do you normally provide lyrics first?
That's how it worked there, and it happened to work out well. I was very green and really didn't know what I was doing on many levels, but I had some flair for it, I guess. But I know, talking to Hank Beebe about how it worked with him and Bill Heyer, the lyricist, when they would do an industrial or probably another show, they had things that were not industrials. Tuscaloosa's Calling Me, you probably know.
Yeah.
But Bill Heyer would write lyrics first, often to the tune in his head of some song that he was not going to tell Hank what it was. He called it the dummy song. He would write new lyrics to a pre-existing tune that he kept in his head, hand the lyrics over to Hank, who didn't know what tune had been secretly referenced. Hank would come up with his own original music for it. But usually, yeah, it was lyrics first and then the music.
You have a really big Hollywood kind of ending to the movie, right? Where you're singing a little, you're
Yes.
part of it. And
I'm not
was this filmed at a studio? You know, tell us how that ending was put together.
So the movie Bathtubs Over Broadway is my exploration into the world of industrials and the people who did them, and learning about it, but also connecting with them and making these wonderful, deep, powerful friendships with people that I couldn't have imagined knowing otherwise. And David decided that the end of the movie, we needed to play our last card, which was, we've talked about how musicals are powerful and can get to some place in your heart and soul that nothing else can. We need to prove it now ourselves and do our own musical number. And so that's what we did. Hank Beebe and I collaborated on a song. I wrote the lyrics first, then he provided the music. And the first time I heard his music, I thought, this is going to be great. And it was. Deva and her team worked out how to do this on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank. And we had enough budget to shoot there for one day. It all had to be done in one day. So it was planned. Every shot was planned. And we had a day of rehearsals. We had a little choreography. I'm not a dancer. Most of the people in the finale are not dancers, if you are. But it was a huge undertaking to get this done in one day. And the joy really does shine through. It's amazing what David was able to accomplish under pressure with time and budget. But we did it. And yes, I'm now in a musical number.
Now You at this point are considering writing a show that could conceivably go to Broadway. Is that now a possibility?
It is possible. My songwriting lately has been a big part of my creative output, but I don't know that it's necessarily theatrical. I still have a complicated relationship, I would say, with musical theater, where I take it on a case by case basis. Some shows I really like. I love How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I love the 1967 movie. Other shows I've seen I really like. Other shows that are famous and well regarded, I go, eh. I don't have it in my blood the same way you do. I've come to it through such a strange side door
But if you've
that
ever seen a movie, and obviously many current things are for movies, do you think you'd ever see, what about a musical of that?
about what?
A movie that, I mean, do you have favorite movies? Or just, what's your favorite movie?
Um, I don't tend to have very many favorite comedy movies. This is another weird thing about me. I'm more of a dark drama or action adventure movie watcher.
Would you be willing to do something that was not primarily comedic?
Oh yeah.
Sweeney
Yeah.
Todd, can you see Sweeney Todd?
Yes. I mean, as long as it's sharp and smart and clever. Sometimes I write things that I don't even think are funny, but other people interpret them as humorous, maybe because just of my background. The line between what's funny and just what's smart and clever is often very blurry to me. Yeah, I would love to find my way towards writing a musical on my terms, but it's not my highest priority. If the right thing occurred to me or was brought to me by people who I was excited to work with, maybe. I was hired to write a musical a few years ago. I won't tell you anymore. I probably shouldn't mention it. I got all the way to signing a contract to write lyrics and co-write a book, and then it fell apart and went away. So almost happened.
It's just a money situation where one of the budget was the backers did not come up with that kind of money.
I don't know. I think there was plenty of money in the background. I don't know if just the creative team at the top got cold feet about what they were doing. Yeah, so that went away. But
they might have thought that you weren't a Broadway name, and they should have done it with Stephen Sondheim. Or
yeah, maybe so. I mean, I'm not a Broadway name. I'm sure I have picked up a lot of precepts of musicals just because between watching real ones and immersing myself in industrials, I probably know more than I think I do. Time will tell. But I'm writing songs that stand alone, country songs, a lot of them. I've done some recording in Nashville. Whether that will overlap with musicals, I don't know. Oh, can't remember if I told you. Oddly, I did collaborate on a song with Stephen Schwartz. Did we talk about this?
I believe I don't remember the details. I'd like to hear the details.
Yeah, it's a Hanukkah song. A friend of mine got me to write a lyric for a Hanukkah song that she liked and then passed along to Stephen Schwartz, who liked it and wrote music. And this was a number of years ago, and it's been in a lot of chorus programs for schools and all that. Since it's, hey, Stephen Schwartz, the guy from Wicked, that gets you some credibility. But Stephen Schwartz knows.
Have you seen it performed?
Yes. I got to go to a live performance at Carnegie Hall a few years ago.
Wow.
And then Stephen Schwartz knows Kristen Chenoweth from Wicked.
Yes, yes.
And one day last December, I got an email from Stephen Schwartz who said, hey, don't know if you're aware of this, Kristen Chenoweth just recorded our song on her new holiday album, and she sang it in concert last night at the Metropolitan Opera House. So suddenly I have this song that kind of went legitimate with this big name. So can't hurt.
Okay, it's been a fascinating discussion, and if both of us, particularly me, hang around to another one and see what happens in the future. But
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Always happy to tell these stories, and you have a special perspective on it. You've seen the slow evolution of my collecting and my saga. So very happy to go over that with you.
good. Thank you for doing it, and we'll be talking on the phone, I'm sure.
Okay, very
Bye
good.
bye. Bye bye.